Hello, my name's Rob Edwards. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. And today we are talking role-playing games again. Because I have been on something of a role-playing kick. It's been helped by the pandemic, in fact, bizarrely, because it's allowed me to reconnect with people back in the UK and play some games with them, which I've absolutely loved. But it's also helped that I've been doing these Let's Play videos on my YouTube channel. The Dragonlance one we just posted last week, 2 weeks ago, and the superhero ones that I did in support of my book. And I've really enjoyed that, and I really want to do some more of them. But they're going to take a little bit of time to plan and prep and find players for and all the rest of it. So I'm not quite ready to unleash those upon the world just yet. But I'm still feeling my role-playingness at the moment. So I thought what I would do today is take a look back at some of my favourite old-school role-playing game systems. And the five examples, I'm going to do five examples that I'm going to do today are all from the late 80s, early 90s, because that's when I was really sort of keyed into role-playing. I was playing at school, at university. I spent a lot of time playing a lot of different games. And here are a list of five of my favourites, arranged chronologically based on their release date. So, the oldest of the games that I'm going to be talking about today is DC Heroes. This is a game which came from Mayfair Games back in the day, originally released in 1985. This is the second edition rule set, which came out in 1989, I think. This is a classic superhero genre game based in the universe of DC Comics, and if you followed my channel for a while, you will understand that's where my comic book and superhero loyalties lie. This is very much a game system of its era. Firstly, this is the entire rulebook. I mean, there's actually a second manual, which is the sort of powers and character generation book. But, you know, these two together are as much of a rule system as you needed back then, even for something as complicated as a superhero system. I love DC Heroes because it was DC, but also because of it actually was pretty good at presenting a broad range of options with a fairly light rule set. The only problem I had with DC Heroes is that the actual core mechanic of it is a little bit clunky. Every power and every skill, every attribute would be recorded with a number of attribute points, APs anyway. And you would use those APs to determine how good your attack would be and how good the resistance of the person that was resisting your attack would be. And this led to a cavalcade of short acronyms. So you had an acting value, your AV, which was based on the attribute points, the AP, of your power or skill that you're using to attack. And the person trying to dodge or avoid your attack would have an opposing value, usually typically determined by the APs of their dexterity score, or if they had particular other abilities which might let them substitute or increase that. And so you would need to know your AV from the APs of your power, and they would need to know their OVs from their abilities. And then you would consult this table, having rolled some dice. There's a table here. That table there, to determine with your acting value against their opposing value, what did you need to roll, and then if you got into the red section, how many column shifts you would have, because then you would need to go to the other table, which is the result table, and compare the APs of your EV, your effect value, with the APs of the resistance value, the RV, and then you would calculate how many columns had to be shifted. And frankly, looking back, it was madness. Every attack required consulting tables, checking dice rolls, column shifts, and comparing that onto another table, and it was rather slow, I'll be honest. But against that, I have played a lot of DC Heroes, and I have had a lot of fun with it. We even back at university ran, I think, at least one, maybe two charity games based on DC Heroes, where players would actually donate to charity by buying extra hero points to help their characters in tight situations. And we actually raised a reasonable amount of money, given it was students putting the money in, a reasonable amount of money for a charity back then for it. We love DC Heroes, and I love DC Heroes, and even now I still play it from time to time. I didn't use it for my Let's Play of my superhero game for my book, simply because I didn't really want to necessarily associate with any one kind of established comic book continuity. But if I had wanted to, then I would absolutely have chosen DC Heroes, because it is my favourite. It is, of course, no longer in print. Sadly, Mayfair Games stopped producing it a long time ago. It did morph into a thing called Blood of Heroes, which you could get for a while, but I think even that stopped being published now. So it is a sad, sad thing that my favourite superhero genre game is now no longer an option for me. So let's move on. What is my second 80s and 90s old school role-playing game that I want to talk to you about? It is the first of the Star Wars role-playing games. This book here, it's nostalgia in my hands. I loved this game system. It came out in 1987. It's actually had a recent re-release from Fantasy Flight Games as a sort of nostalgia thing. But this original version came from West End Games in 1987, and it's a thing of beauty. It is a thing of beauty because, just first of all, just look at the book. Where have we got some? We've got some great photo plates in here. I love this. Some characterful stuff. A challenge this big is not for everyone. Join the Imperial Navy today. So really colourful, really creative. And there's rules here for spaceships and the Force and blasters and all the rest of it. And delightfully, the character sheets are all based on templates that it offers in the back of the book. So there's a young senatorial and a Wookiee available there. And you'd have attribute codes and skills underneath those attributes. And essentially, what it was an opportunity, an excuse to roll buckets full of D6, because all of your attributes would be defined as being a number of dice plus a number, so 3D plus 2, 7D, various different options in the middle there. And when you tried to do something with that particular skill or that particular attribute, you would roll that number of D6 and add it up, compare it to a DC number. So this is, a much simpler game system, a lot quicker of a game system, as long as you had a lot of D6 on hand. I loved this game system. I've played this game system to death. In fact, I've still got some old character sheets tucked here in the front of the book. And, one of the things that the game system did, that's one of mine, but one of the things that the game system did was in the published modules for it, it had usually got scripted sections, so there'd be a small scene to start in media res for the adventure, and you would assign roles in this little script to your players that sort of roughly match the characters they were playing, and they would act out, for a given value of acting, the start of the scene to set the adventure going. And you would immediately then go to different characterization and people would actually start playing their own characters unscripted. But it just was a nice sort of cinematic way to start modules, and I always rather enjoyed it. And I did it myself for a lot of Star Wars games that I ran. It is such a fundamentally easy rules-light system that you really could do anything with it. And I planned whole campaigns basically on sitting down in front of my group of players and going, right, I should have an adventure for today, shouldn't I? And because the rule system was so easy, I could actually go from there. And I ran dozens, hundreds possibly, of Star Wars games completely on the fly. There are, of course, other Star Wars role-playing game systems out there. Wizards of the Coast had the license for a while. Currently, I believe it rests with Fantasy Flight Games, and they're very interesting Edge of Empire and other associated game systems for different elements of the Star Wars universe. And I really do enjoy it. I think it's a really interesting system. But this thing, the simplicity of West End Games D6 version Star Wars, was a thing of beauty. And I miss playing it. Next up, number 3 on the list is going to be Gurps, the generic universal role-playing system. It originally came out, I think, in 84, 85-ish, but 3rd edition, which is the version that I played, look at this cover, 3rd edition, which is the version I played, came out, I believe, in 89. And the idea behind Gurps, if you've not come across it before, is that it is a generic system. In fact, it stands for the Generic Universal Role-Playing System. And it has rules in it to deal with different tech levels, different power sets, magic, ultra tech, swashbucklers, supers. All of these were options within Gurps. And I think it's actually very important to note that some game systems are very good at doing some things, and some game systems are very bad at things. And Gurps is great if you're looking for a gritty, realistic, nuts and bolts down to the minutiae kind of level detail of combat and stuff like that. Gurps is wonderful. I love Gurps. We've played a lot of Gurps over the years. You can really go to town on designing your characters because it's all based on spending points, and you buy skills and advantages and offset them with disadvantages, and you can build really interesting characters with Gurps, and I've enjoyed a lot of Gurps. The big problem I have with Gurps, the reason why Gurps is not my go-to system for everything that I do, is that it is quite time intensive to put it together. There's a lot to it. It's quite a crunchy system. There's a lot of rules in there, and combats can again be very slow. Not because of the DC system where you had to look at various different tables of things. It was all based on a 3d6 dice roll, but typically you had to worry about, my attack roll versus their dodge, and then I have my rate to fire to worry about and how many bullets hit in each burst, and there was all sorts of madness like that. And it meant that for a game system that to be generic, I don't think it was. I don't think it was universal, certainly. Because when it came to superhero action, for example, I would much rather go play DC Heroes or one of these other game systems which was specifically designed for superheroes, because at the power levels of superheroes, Gurps doesn't really work. But for martial artists, swashbucklers, police detectives, in a gritty sort of horror-themed game, love Gurps. Really good for that kind of thing. Number 4 on my list is another generic system, kind of. It's both generic and specific. So this one is one I don't actually have paper copies of the rulebooks anymore. I've got digital copies of later releases of the system. So what I'm going to show you here is my copy of one of my favourite ever published modules, and that is the Destiny map for Torg. This was actually a brilliant adventure. Part 1 of the Relics of Power trilogy. All 3 of them were really good. Torg was a really interesting system. If you've not come across it before, the sort of 30-second pitch, Earth has been invaded by different realities, and those realities have basically taken over areas of the planet and brought their reality with them. So if you go to certain areas of America now, which has been invaded by the living land, you'll find it overrun by dinosaurs, and perhaps your guns don't work anymore because the local laws of reality of the living land don't support gunpowder. So, if you have an adventure there, there's a chance that your guns may stop working. If you visit the UK, large parts of that has been taken over by Isle, which is a fantasy world, so wizards and dragons and undead and all that usual stuff. France has been taken over by the Nile Empire. No. France has been taken over. I was thinking, never mind. France has been taken over by the cyber papacy, which is very much a cyberpunk, gritty noir detective kind of place. The Nile Empire has taken over Egypt, strangely, hence the name, which is a sort of pulp action, two-fisted heroes and gritty detective stuff, noir detective stuff. All that lives in the Nile Empire. And then you have others like Arosh and Pan-Pacifica, as it's called these days. And the idea was basically you would create heroes that could come from Core Earth or any of the other invading realities, because they're resisting the High Lords who rule in these realities. And it meant you could have really wacky crossovers of characters, like your wizard could be teaming up with your cyberpunk netrunner, and your costumed superhero could all be on the same adventuring team and go off and deal with this. And one of the things which was really interesting about Torg is it had an ongoing storyline, which if you really got into it, you could be involved in the Infiniverse, as they called it, and you could be involved in the flow of the campaign, back in the day anyway, by reporting what happened in your modules. I'm not sure whether the current version, Torg Eternity, is quite so much into that. But the concept was always quite interesting, and I really liked Torg and its fun system. One of the things that I love about Torg is the drama deck. Let me just get that for you. This is an original Torg drama deck. The drama deck was used by the Games Master to determine initiative in combat, and it was used by the players to give them bonuses in combat. So, for example, this card here, at the top half of it, if you can see that, focus, no. Anyway, the top half of it determines the initiative. So in standard situations, the heroes tend to go first and get bonuses, and the villains get penalties. In dramatic situations, the villains tend to go first and get the bonuses, and the heroes tend to go second and get the disadvantages. And then the players could play these cards to give them bonuses. So this is a pretty generic action card, which would give them a bonus onto their actions. And it really made for a very interesting flow of every combat. You could have the same combat with the same goons that you were fighting, and it would play completely differently if you were playing a standard scene or a dramatic scene, because the initiative would work differently for those different scenes. I love the Torg drama deck, and I've even ported it across to DC Heroes a couple of times, just because DC Heroes wasn't complicated enough already. I was using Torg drama deck to add a little bit of extra flavour to it. I really, really enjoy Torg. And I've been pestering my Finnish family to play some Torg with me, and hopefully I'll be able to get them to come round to that, possibly when we finish Rime of the Frostmate. The last game system that I want to talk to you today about came out in 1991 from Phage Press, and it is the Amber Diceless role-playing system. This is another one that's come a little bit adrift with age here. This book has seen a lot of action. I've played a lot of Amber over the years. Amber is based on Roger Zelazny's Chronicles of Amber book series. It's a setup with infinite shadow between two poles of reality, and so your characters have the ability to walk between universes and go off and seek whatever they need in those realities. So if they want to go and find a world with sword and sorcery, they can. If they want to go and find a world where they are the Supreme Galactic Emperor in charge of an Imperial Navy, they can. Essentially, it is entirely possible to run an Amber campaign where the player characters never meet each other, because the universe is so vast, the multiverse is so vast, they would not come across each other. Obviously, it's the job of the Games Master to do a little bit of prep to the storyline to make sure they would meet from time to time. But I genuinely have played one campaign of Amber where half of the group never met the other half until the final 20% of the entire campaign. Amber is great as a very loose system. It doesn't use dice. It has 4 basic attributes. The idea of powers is a bit strange because if you can walk to a reality where you have whatever powers you want. But the important places, the real places, which are Amber and the Courts of Chaos on the other end of reality, that's where only real powers tend to work. And those are defined in this book. The thing I love about it, because it is diceless, is that when you get to combat, even combat is a role-playing situation. You role-play out the fight, and essentially what you're trying to do in that is determine whether you are better than the other guy or not. And if you are not better than the other guy, you are then trying to find a way to get out of the combat before he kills you. So it's a lot of the time it's about infighting. It's about not always necessarily player versus player, although that's strongly supported in the system and the world as well. The whole point is that, Amber is a place where brother fights brother, cousin fights cousin. So certainly a certain amount of player versus player was not uncommon within the Amber system. But it was all about rewarding creativity and rewarding role-playing, and I love Amber. It's not for everybody. I've tried it with a few groups who just did not take to it at all. But I do really enjoy this game system. Anyway, there we go. There's a bit of a trip down nostalgia lane for you. Some of my favourite role-playing systems from the late 80s and early 90s. Most of them are not available anymore, so, sucks to be you, I guess. No, but they are available in some of them are available in reprints or in other forms. But if you get a chance to play any of these, or if you have played any of these, tell me your favourites down in the comments. I'd really be interested to hear. And if you haven't played these, but you have another favourite old school role-playing game system from the 80s or 90s, why not tell me about that as well? Let's have a chat about old school gaming. Anyway, that's it from me today. Thank you very much for listening and watching and me rambling on about my old systems. And I will catch you next time for whatever it is that enters my mind to talk about next. All right. Cheers.